If you keep pacing like that, you're bound to wear a path through the floor. Iona stopped and glanced at Miss Stratford, who was sitting in the parlor and working on some needlepoint. Her faded red hair was pulled back into a tidy bun, her clothes of the highest fashion, but it was those sharp green eyes that seemed to see more than Iona might wish that were unnerving. She tried not to fidget as she sat on the edge of the settee. I'm sorry, Miss Stratford. I suppose I'm a bit restless. Naturally, she murmured. You're going to be with a handsome duke all day. No doubt the butterflies in your stomach are being quite contrary. Iona barely withheld a groan. What if I make a misstep? I'm not concerned about that at all, the lady waved a dismissive hand. You were raised properly in a good household, and Agatha will be acting as your chaperone for the day. I have no fear that all will be well. Iona exhaled steadily. She wished she might be able to say the same. For some reason, seeing the Duke every day was not nearly as bothersome when she was wearing her plain attire because it reminded her of the difference in their stations. However, wearing a soft, light blue gown sparked the memory of a former life, one she would rather leave behind. Nevertheless, Rosewood was her employer, and if he asked her to accompany him, it was difficult to refuse for fear he would dismiss her completely. It wouldn't be so bad if she didn't think about him continuously, if her journal wasn't starting to fill with several entries about him each night. She had told herself that any sort of fascination she might have held toward him had faded when he'd taken off to London for a few days, but it seemed as if absence had made the heart grow fonder. She was starting to fear too much intimate time in his company would cause her firm demeanor to falter. She suddenly gave her arm a slight pinch. It was one thing if she was alone with the Duke day in and day out, but this was one afternoon. She was making too much out of something that shouldn't be worrisome at all. Nevertheless, when the Duke was announced, she jumped slightly. Miss Stratford raised her eyebrows at her reaction, but said nothing as she turned her attention back to her task. I'll see you later this evening, Iona noted. The lady glanced up with a smile. Have a nice time. Iona was certain that she was about to be sick, but rather than greet Rosewood with a grimace, she forced a smile on her face as she met him in the foyer. He was looking at a random picture, and when she approached, he turned to her with a smile. Ah, Miss Richards, it's nice to see you are punctual at all times, not just when it comes to my gardens. The easy greeting soothed some of her apprehension. Keep your focus on flowers and nothing more, she reminded herself. I have always prided myself on being prompt. He inclined his head and then offered her his arm. She hesitated, wondering if she should accept, but since she didn't wish to be rude, she threaded her arm through his as he escorted her outside. Agatha will be joining us, she added. She's the housemaid. Capital. He inclined his head. By the time Iona was comfortably seated in the familiar vehicle, she saw Agatha exit the house. The Duke spoke a few words to her, and she nodded and climbed up next to the driver as Rosewood joined Iona. She could feel the blood recede from her face. Isn't she riding inside? I told her that a chaperone wasn't necessary since we aren't courting, and she mentioned how she appreciates the fresh air. He winked at her as he shut the door, and the carriage jerked into motion. He settled himself across from her without a care to be had. Iona wanted to point out that, courting or not, her reputation could be taken into question since they were alone together in the interior, but she decided it was best not to press the issue. She certainly didn't want to sound like a prude, and it wasn't as though the Duke was about to ravish her. Unfortunately, the very image of him doing just that had her cheeks heating by degrees. Are you well? Iona's focus jerked to him. What? He smiled in an easy manner. I asked if you were well. Your cheeks are slightly red. She lifted her hands and pressed them against her face. No, I suppose I'm just a little warm. You should take off your bonnet, he suggested. There's no need to stand on ceremony at the moment. You need to be comfortable. That's impossible with you so close, she thought to herself. But she decided she would do as he advised and remove the offending straw. She reached up to take out the hat pin, but when she attempted to pull the bonnet free, it caught on a stray strand of her hair. It came off with a painful pull that caused a few of the pins that were holding her hair back to break free and ping to the floor of the carriage. As a result, the long length of her hair came tumbling about her shoulders. Oh, Her hand immediately went to her head as her cheeks went from warm to scalding. She reached out her arm and tried to gather the pins that were rolling just out of her reach at her feet, in a desperate attempt to salvage the embarrassing situation. Could it possibly get any worse? Allow me. The Duke easily gathered the pins in his grasp. She exhaled in relief, but when she glanced up, she found his face just inches from her own. Time instantly stood still as her lips parted in an unconscious invitation.